This happened to my mom when she was a teenager, around 15 or 16 years old. This was during the 80s, and I still get goosebumps whenever my mom tells me this story. To cut to the chase, my mom and her two friends from high school were out on a picnic at this really neat little area that her friend knew about. According to her friend, the area wasn't well known to the public as it was very much off the beaten path, meaning it was far away from the public or locals. Anyway, they had packed up a blanket and had brought along multiple baskets of food, mostly consisting of bread and ham to make sandwiches. School was rough around this time, and my mom and her friends needed a break from all the chaos and stress, which is why they thought a picnic would be the perfect outing. At some point during their lunch, my mom excuses herself and tells her friends that she was going to the bathroom. With no restrooms around, my mom goes and walks about a few feet into the woods, far enough so that her friends can't see her. She does her business and gets back up when she notices what looks to be some sort of cave that dug deep into the earth. Being the intensively curious teen she was back then, she goes over to the entrance of the cave. It was dark and cold, but my mom was no coward and proceeded to descend into the cave. Thankfully, my mom had her small pack on her, which just so happened to have a mini flashlight, so she used it to light her way. All she could hear was the birds from outside and water dripping from somewhere deep into the cave. As she kept going, she immediately gets an unsettling feeling in her gut, like a strong sense of dread, but a part of her wanted to keep going to see where the end of the cave led to. The further she went, the stronger the feeling got. Eventually, she came across into some sort of large opening where she saw 5 large stones placed circling around each other. At this point, the feeling came back stronger than ever, and that almost made her turn back. Many of the rocks were covered with poorly graffitied monster-type faces. However, that wasn't the part that disturbed her the most. The rocks and walls were spray-painted with symbols of Satan in red, along with words that were somehow relating to death and suffering. That was the part that made my mom leave. She never did end up telling her friends about her discovery, fearing that she would get in trouble. To this day, my mom still hasn't figured out what that mysterious cave was for. She doesn't know if it was an elaborate joke or if it was something else. But she still wonders what that hidden room was for, and the horrible things that might have taken place there. Whatever it was enough to creep her out for a very, very long time. When I was about 14, my family and I moved into an old house that was at least 60 years old. Surprisingly, it was still in pretty good condition for a house that old. Anyway, my sister and I had shared one room together, and as big as this house was, it didn't have many bedrooms. Just a master bedroom and a spare. Oftentimes, our parents would go out during the day for work or go into town to run some errands, and us kids wanted no part of that. One day, my dad was at work while my mom was out during her weekly routine of shopping, and my sister and I were home alone. My sister was 9 at the time, and I always looked up to her. Since our parents were gone, we both decided to do a small little picnic out in our backyard. Our backyard is huge. You might as well consider it as a miniature field. My sister brings out the chips and heats up our leftover burgers from the other night while I set up the table and chairs for our picnic. Even though our house was nice, we didn't have a TV, and this was before iPhones came out, so a picnic was the closest thing to entertainment. We start eating while talking to each other when I notice a car sitting at the edge of our driveway. A 2003 Nissan Altima to be exact. Right off the bat, I knew that it wasn't any of my parents' cars as they don't drive a Nissan, and as far as I know, they were still out. I took a closer look at it and noticed someone in the front seat, staring intently at us. We did happen to live in an area that was notorious for creeps, so I dismissed it as one of them. Suddenly, I heard the car door slam and see that this guy is walking towards us. He was not a pleasant-looking man. He had long, messy gray hair and a fat beard gut. He kept walking closer to us and asks us if we were enjoying our food and if we were okay. I give a waving gesture and tell him that we were fine, hoping he would get the hint to leave us alone. However, that didn't seem to faze him, because he kept coming directly towards us while giving us an unsettling smile I can't even describe. Once he got to us, he said something that made my heart stop. "I've got some more food for you guys in my car. Let's go get some." Now, my parents were always strict with us kids about the stranger danger type thing, and I told the guy to leave us alone or I'd call the cops. He lifted his flannel to reveal a handgun sticking out of his pocket, and that's when he got upset. "I'd much appreciate it if you would just reconsider." At this point, my sister starts crying, and even though I was 14, I couldn't take this guy on, especially if he had a gun, even if I tried. Thankfully, one of my neighbors happened to be walking his dog and noticed the whole ordeal. When he saw this, he said, "Hey, who the hell are you?" The man went pale, and his eyes were as big as saucers. As soon as he knew that he was caught, he full-on ran back to his car and sped down the road. My neighbors stayed with us until the cops and my mom came, but they unfortunately never found the man. My parents now have someone watch over us until I was 16, and nothing has happened to us ever since, and we thankfully never saw that man again. This happened a few years ago while on a road trip with some of my close friends from high school. It was the middle of summer, and we all planned on taking a trip up to my uncle's beach house in Cape Cod. It was my uncle's house, but seeing as he was on vacation, he was nice enough to allow us to go for a weekend trip. School had a lot of stress on us, so a weekend trip seemed like the perfect getaway. We all had packed lunch and stuff to make sandwiches in case we got hungry. I know, it's not the best thing to eat, but we were 16 and broke high school students, so we couldn't afford to stop at local restaurants. About halfway through our road trip, we all started to get hungry, and we didn't want to get there on an empty stomach. So in the end, we eventually decided to pull over to the side of the road, where there just so happened to be a picnic table right by some trees along with a small park grill. We hop out of the car and bring our food to the table and start making cheese sandwiches while stuffing ourselves with chips. So we're sitting there, having a decent lunch, when I look ahead and notice what appeared to be someone in the woods about 20 or so feet away, peering out from a tree. At first, I thought that we could have been on somebody's land, and seeing as we were on the outskirts of Rhode Island, there's a lot of private property around here. I stand up and ask them if this was private property. However, they didn't respond. At this point, we couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but whoever they were started acting very abnormal. They kept hiding behind the tree, peering out every few seconds as if they were trying to hide from us. I then got a very strange and unsettling feeling, and something began to tell me that this wasn't some strict property owner. I get up from our table and walk over to where I saw them, and the closer I got, I began to realize that it was a woman. Maybe late 30s, medium build, and for whatever reason she was wearing a tank top with a phone in her right pocket. She then stepped out from behind the tree, and that was when I noticed that she was hiding something behind her back. I had no interest in finding out as to what it was, but it was obviously something she didn't want me to see. I asked her again if she needed help and if this was her property. This time, I got a response. In a very deep and monotone voice, she said,
"My husband kicked me out of the house. I have a friend who lives up the street. Can you give me a ride?"
This caught me off guard, and I was beginning to think that this girl actually needed help. However, her request wasn't formal or direct. It sounded as if it had been practiced, and something in my gut told me not to do it. If this girl really did have a friend close by, why couldn't she have just called her to pick her up instead of relying on us? I politely declined and told her that we had to be somewhere. Then again, she repeated the same phrase.
"My husband kicked me out of the house. I have a friend who lives up the street. Can you give me a ride?"
Once again, I told her no and signaled to my friends that we had to start packing up. She looked at me, staring into my soul, and repeated the same phrase.
"My husband kicked me out of the house. I have a friend who lives up the street. Can you give me a ride?"
I again gave her a firm no, and then she said 5 words that sent a chill down my spine.
"You made the right decision."